Hello and welcome to Our American States, a podcast from the National Conference of State Legislatures. I'm your host, Ed Smith.
If you talk to almost all the tribes, there's 574 tribes in the U.S., energy security is going to be more about having access to cheap, affordable electricity.
That was Daniel Cardenas Jr., the CEO, president, and chairman of the board of the National Tribal Energy Association, and one of my guests on this podcast to discuss energy security and energy challenges on tribal lands. He's joined by Trent Marlett, energy manager for the Utility Authority of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma. Overall, tribal households in this country pay more than the average for power, and 17,000 homes on tribal land have no electricity, according to the 2023 U.S. Department of Energy report to Congress. The report also noted the critical need for electricity infrastructure on tribal lands, some of which has been addressed through federal grants, loans, and technical assistance to tribes. Cardenas' organization represents the 4 largest energy-producing tribes. He noted that access to reasonably priced electricity is the greatest concern for tribal members, and said the vast energy resources on tribal lands mean the future of energy is going to include them. Marlett explained how the Choctaw Nation works with their state energy generators to manage new projects and to try to stay up with the growth in the area, and how folks in his state view energy security. Here's our discussion, starting with Daniel Cardenas. Daniel, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Ed, for inviting me.
Let me ask you first, you're the CEO and chairman of the National Tribal Energy Association, and I wonder if you could tell our listeners a little bit about that organization, the people it represents, and the work it does.
Well, the National Tribal Energy Association started in the late Obama administration. It represents the 4 largest energy-producing tribes. And so we have the Navajo Nation, which is the largest tribe by area and population, and they produce pretty much every energy or kind of energy, fuel, on their land. The Crow Nation, which is the largest owner of coal in the nation. The MHA, the 3 affiliated tribe, which is in North Dakota, they're in the Bakken. They produce about a third of all the oil in the Bakken. They're the largest oil producing tribe. And then the Southern Ute Indian tribe, which is in Colorado, and they're the largest natural gas producing tribe. So between them, they produce over 90% on a BTU basis of all the energy produced on Indian country on a reservation. So there are still other tribes that produce energy, but they're not part of our association on just these 4 tribes.
We wanted to talk about energy security, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about energy security and what that means for the folks that you represent, and how does it differ from the way states think about energy security?
Primarily, the problem with energy in general is most people think about it is in terms of flipping the switch at home, the electricity that we get. And obviously that's a big part of it, but it also includes all the other types of energy that we produce and all the uses of it. But in Indian country, energy security, if you talk to almost all the tribes, there's 574 tribes in the U.S., energy security is going to be more about having access to cheap, affordable electricity. That's really what comes in people's minds is around energy security.
Let me just follow up on that a little bit, because that was another question I wanted to ask you about the biggest challenges that tribal communities face when it comes to energy. There's cost, there's access, there's reliability. There are other issues, but you're saying access and probably at a reasonable cost are really what is one of the biggest concerns.
Oh, for sure. There's a couple of things related to access, right? So most tribes, most people in the U.S. have access to electricity. With tribes, you have a situation where 1/3 of tribal citizens actually live on an Indian reservation. That means 2/3 do not. They live in suburbs, they live in other rural areas, and they live in urban areas. On reservation, most people have access to electricity. My tribe's from California. I remember the Pit River tribe, which is a small tribe in the northeastern part of the state. There are people that I know of that don't have electricity. In the most populous, most richest state, they still are not hooked up because the utilities say they can't afford to hook people up. So there are pockets of populations of people in Indian country that have no electricity, or very unreliable electricity. There are some that choose not to have electricity, and so, for instance, in some places on the Navajo Indian reservation, culturally, some of the elders, some of the older people, some of the families culturally don't want to be attached to electricity. But that's a small handful. Most people that are on a reservation want electricity, just they either can't afford the hookup, the access to the utility, the price that the utilities charging for the poles or for the wires to be strung is too cost prohibitive. So I'd say the vast majority of folks do have it. The ones that don't, it's a cost issue. And then you couple that with energy burden, where a large percentage of the income of a lot of Native Americans goes towards electricity, the heating, cooling. We bear a tremendous energy burden in Indian country, both like I said, on reservation, and then those Native Americans who choose to live in the city, also tend to have higher energy costs than in the rural areas.
So while access is there for almost everyone, cost is a barrier, even such a barrier that it keeps some people from getting it, it sounds like.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. And because I'll add to that is Native Americans on average, right? If you look at census data and other statistics, we tend to be some of the lowest wage earners. Our incomes are towards the bottom. And so you couple that with, so our rates of poverty are higher, and all the other statistics tend to place us towards the lower percentiles of income, coupled with higher energy costs. It's just like a tsunami of cost.
And of course, there is some irony in the fact that you're among the largest energy producing groups in the country, and yet some significant obstacles there for people trying to afford energy.
Let me just add again to that is, so when everybody else thinks about energy security and the way it's, and the way I, normally think about it, and the way the administration, President Trump's administration, and probably most of the states think about energy security is securing resources. And so Indian country, the natural resources that we collectively own, whether it's fossil energy, resources around renewables, wind and solar, biomass, geothermal, hydro, are some of the richest lands in the country. So on an energy security basis, we are big players, or we have the potential to supply a large a portion of the future energy needs in this country. Not even talking about critical minerals and other ancillary sort of resources that tie into energy of the future that are in Indian country as well that haven't been tapped. I always use the tagline that the energy transition goes through Indian country. So no matter what we do in the future, whether it's a renewable path, whether it's through advanced energy like nuclear or more efficient fossil energy, no matter what those paths look like, it's all going to go through Indian country. And I think that's an opportunity. It's a curse, but it's also an opportunity, a double-edged sword.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really excellent point. Let me ask you a little about funding for energy security projects. Have you seen promising partnerships that you've been able to explore with for those kind of projects?
A little bit complicated, right? Over the last 4 years, a lot of resources came into Indian country or were promised from the last administration, from the Biden administration, primarily around renewables. And so those really went to funding, planning for micro projects, small community sized projects, where making money or having a profit was not the number one goal. And so, although a lot of focus has been on that and it's needed, there really hasn't been a focus on commercial scale projects, large utility scale projects. There are some existing power production on several of the reservations, but not a lot, not really compared to our neighbors and compared to other places in the U.S. As I mentioned, resources have come in from the feds, from our federal partners. With the new administration, some of that has obviously with the big beautiful bill, some of those funds have been repealed and rescinded. We haven't figured out yet what that impact is going to be, and so looking at states, looking at our state partners. Not all states obviously are made equal or made they're not all the same, but some of the states have been doing a really good job over the last decade providing resources to tribes. California, Colorado, states in the Northwest, Minnesota, of all the states are probably on the top end of providing grant resources and funding, have sort of opened up the doors. It wasn't always that way. I'm originally from California. My tribe's from California. And when I was younger, that wasn't the case in California. But now among the states, it's probably the top performer in terms of opening up their purse strings and allowing tribes, tribal governments, tribal organizations to access funding that cities and the counties and other entities have. And
I think you were going to follow up and say something about private actors in this area, and tell us about that.
yeah, in the private sector, I think in a different way, the private sector has been more open, more willing to understand tribes and forming relationships with them, because obviously in their mind there's a profit motive, and so have been successful projects that have been built on Indian country. Granted, these are primarily owned by those companies. So there's some solar projects in Nevada on the Moapa Indian Reservation that the tribe gets, a lease payment, rent payment. They're really not partners in the actual project. There are some wind projects that are again commercial scale that some tribes have on their lands. Same, there's a couple of natural gas power plants that I know of in on the border of California and Arizona. Calpine operated that for a long time, and I'm not sure if they still do. But and then obviously we know some of the just until recently the Navajo Generating Station, which is a coal plant that got closed down under the first Trump administration. There still is Four Corners power plant that's operated, I think, by APS from Arizona that still operates. There has been some investment by the private sector in Indian country, but Indian country is over 60 million acres plus, and there's only a handful of projects, and so I see that as an opportunity to do more in the future. The door is open; it's not wide open yet.
Well, you sound like an optimistic guy, Daniel. I think you're looking at the bright side that maybe maybe there's more opportunity there for people. Let me ask you about something that has come up again and again when I've done energy podcasts over the last couple of years, and that's cybersecurity. And I wonder about the concern in Indian country about that, and whether you have the resources to try to address that issue.
I think it is a concern, just as Americans in general. If we understand the power industry, transmission, and we understand our 21st century issues, challenges, cybersecurity is at the top of the list because of the Internet of Things, right? I mean, as we become more connected, we open ourselves up to more bad actors. In Indian country, this is probably the area that we have the least capacity to deal with. There are some tribal utilities, just a handful. Most of the utilities, other than large utilities that cover certain states, most of the utility service comes from co-ops in Indian country because most Indian country is rural, and so those utilities aren't making big profits to begin with. So they also have probably a deficiency when dealing with cybersecurity, and then we're even less. And so that's an opportunity, an area for growth that we need to gain capacity. When we talk about capacity, really we're talking about it's not just money, it's the knowledge, the professional experience to be able to secure our transmission lines, our infrastructure, all our infrastructure, whether it's water, housing. Some tribes have casinos, and other businesses, and so it's trying to secure those things too. And so we're really stretched thin in terms of the capacity. So cybersecurity, I think, is something we think about, and a lot of us, it keeps us awake at night, but we really don't have any resources to deal with it.
Yeah, I did a podcast several weeks ago talking with some people from a co-op and municipal utilities. They had some of the same concern that what they really need is sort of the knowledge to come in and help them do at least the basic things to ensure that they've got decent cyber hygiene. I hear you that is going to be a real challenge, and I think it's a challenge for a lot of folks. As we finish up here, Daniel, the audience here is largely state legislators, legislative staff, some other people interested in policy. And I wonder what you would say to state lawmakers around the country on how they might better work with tribal communities, work with your organization around these energy issues.
I think first it's to invite them to the table. Slowly it's happening, with for instance, with the National Utility Commission, the association that's for those guys. I've been to some of their meetings. The association around the state energy offices, they've done a good job at inviting me and including me on our organization and what they're trying to do with the states. And so I think the ball is rolling. But for instance, there's another organization like the Western Interstate Energy Board, which represents, I think, 10 or 11 of the Western states and then 2 provinces in Canada. Although they're set up for the states. I mean, they're set up through their legislators or set up legislatures, and there's funding that those states provide so that their legislators and staff can participate. And although tribes technically can be invited to their gatherings, a lot of tribes don't have, like, not just the capacity, they don't have the resources to attend those meetings or participate, and they're not part of the governing structure. So I think a role for the states, or something to think about in the future, is for legislators to start thinking about how do we incorporate tribal governments into those kind of bodies, and because we're not going to recreate the wheel, but I think that's the low hanging fruit, to be able to take existing organizations and structures and modify them so that tribes can participate if they so choose. And so that's just one example of, I think, where there's room for growth and an opportunity that is something that I'm pursuing is just that.
I really think you're right. I think the answer to a lot of these things is often more communication, more effort to include more voices, listen to people more. So I thank you for walking us through this and telling us what's going on with your organization and your community. Thanks very much, and take care.
Well, thanks a lot, Ed. Thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate it.
I'll be right back after this short break with Trent Marlett.
When it comes to election policies, do you know how laws are different in each state? There's one easy resource to find out. NCSL, partnering with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, has compiled a comprehensive review on those election policies in the new Soup to Nuts reference guide, Helping America Vote, Election Administration in the United States. All the topics are there: voter ID, post-election audits, voter list maintenance, recounts, you name it, the book covers it. Hard copies are available to legislators and legislative staff. If you want one, send an email to elections-info@ncsl.org. That's elections-info@ncsl.org. Order yours today.
Trent, great to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Ed. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity, and it's nice meeting you and being able to talk about a topic that I think is very important these days. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So why don't we start and let you tell our listeners a little bit about your role as energy manager for the utility authority there in Oklahoma for the Choctaw Nation.
Okay, sure. So I think a little context is due here. So we are utility authority, but unfortunately it's in name only, and that trips a lot of people up. We're fully integrated into the state, and We are dependent upon our utility providers to bring us power, water, all of our utilities. So it's a little misleading on the front end, but it's interesting. It started in 2014 as a grant to kind of pursue a full-blown tribal utility authority. There wasn't at the time quite enough support. I think there was a lot of lessons learned that it kind of phased out, but leadership did agree that it is beneficial to have our own utility authority to manage all things utilities, and it really focused on billing management in the beginning. I was brought on in 2015 as a utility coordinator. It was a brand new position, brand new department, and I was really kind of a liaison between the utility companies and the Choctaw Nation. And that had to do with a lot of coordination on construction projects, from getting infrastructure in the ground to reporting and helping out with outages, and then it just kind of has evolved over the years, and we do a whole lot. But as far as energy management, we actually just started, and I was awarded the energy manager job in 2024, and so it aligns with my background. I come from a co-op, Western Farmers and Cotton Electric Cooperative here in Oklahoma, and so it's just, I think with the times and the economy, and I think a lot of our revenue streams were not performing as well as expected, it was time to really start looking at other ways that the tribe could save kind of on the bottom end operations. So it just aligned perfectly, and we hit the ground running. So what I've been asked to do is, just what you would think an energy manager does, is help develop and implement these energy management strategies across all Choctaw Nation facilities. And there's a bunch. I think we're over 350 now in 10.5 counties here in southeast Oklahoma. And just look for ways to optimize our conservation and our operations, and look for areas that we're wasting energy. And it's been a really successful 2 years so far. We drafted a policy, and leadership loved it. We ended up saving, just on behavioral change, I'm proud of this, that's why I mention it, just on behavioral change and operating our facilities just more focused and with energy in mind, we were able to save $2 million the first year without spending any capital. And so that's really my role. And I also work hand in hand with our utility providers, our local municipalities, and it's just it's a great job, and I really enjoy it.
Well, that's great background. I think that is the sort of context that maybe legislators wouldn't necessarily have. So thanks for walking us through that. The thrust of this podcast is to talk about energy security, and that means different things to different communities in very different ways. And I wonder, for the Choctaw Nation, for those folks there in Oklahoma, and maybe it's all these things, but you tell us kind of the priorities. Is it access? Is it affordability, resilience, reliability? How does that shape up for the people who are served by that?
I think energy security, it's relatively a new phrase to me. It's kind of a buzzword, but I think a lot of what we're doing fully aligns with energy security. And so, to your point, yeah, all of those things are very important. It's our ability to access reliable, affordable energy that can meet our growth, because we have grown substantially over the 10 years that I've been here. And just, we have such a good relationship with our utility providers and hearing their challenges, and we want to make sure that we're, able to work with them and that this growth can be sustainable. That's really what it means to us. Now, again, a little more context. I think a lot of people, just from all the meetings and networking I've done over the years, I think when they think of tribes or the Choctaw Nation, I think our minds automatically go to like a true reservation, middle of nowhere, zero infrastructure. It's all on the tribe to meet the needs of their tribal members and facilities. But we are fully integrated here in the state of Oklahoma. We haven't really started pursuing any of our own generation, but we're definitely looking at it. And so right now our approach is just to, again, partner with the people that we're dependent on for our energy needs, while reducing, again, our energy footprint. We're really come a long way with our low cost, no capital behavioral changes to reduce demand on the grid. Also, we're very fortunate here in Oklahoma. We do have probably the most competitive rates in the nation. It's a very attractive cost per kilowatt hour. And I think that attracts a lot of businesses. Right now, the buzzword is data centers. They're really interested in Oklahoma. And so that's a big concern with both our providers and us. And us being able to grow while this new load is really coming in and changing the environment as far as capacity on these utility providers. But having such a good attractive rate, that has its own challenges, because when we do look at like distributed energy resource projects, solar, batteries, wind, the economic return on investments, it's not very attractive, because we're all comparing it to a relatively low cost of energy versus someone maybe wanting to do a project in California, which has a much higher rate.
Well, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had on energy podcasts about data centers. They do seem to be driving an awful lot of the consumption here in the next few years.
One other thing I might add, Ed, if that's okay, it just kind of dawned on me. We are not really like a typical reservation, like I mentioned earlier, but we are in southeast Oklahoma, and so Oklahoma is such a wonderful state, and I've always lived here and I love it, but there's so many different ecosystems and geographies. And so down here in southeast Oklahoma, I'm from western Oklahoma originally, it's very hilly, it's covered in trees, and so reliability and resilience is also a big topic, just because of, again, we're in Oklahoma. It seems like we get the gambit of severe weather, from extreme heat to tornadoes and high winds, and then also you throw in ice storms just to make it real interesting. So that's also a focus of ours, is how we can continue to make it more resilient.
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time in Oklahoma. I'm pretty familiar with the state, and you're right, it is a beautiful place. Let me ask you, in the context of what you've described here, when major projects come along, and these I assume would probably be initiated more by the utility you partner with, what kind of role does your utility have in that, and what kind of financing models are available to do any of these major projects?
Sure. So funding projects, specifically energy projects, it is challenging. Since the 10 years I've been here, we do not utilize any debt mechanism of funding. Like, we don't really have loans. If the tribe can't pay for it, if the case has not been made that it is a good investment, then it's a real challenge to get that approved. Now, since we are so dependent on our providers, I also think that they're maybe not as equal as dependent on us, but we are such a large economic driver here in southeast Oklahoma. They're approaching us with some projects that maybe they're looking at. It's going to help them. It's also going to help us. You have a unique standing with the federal government on funding. As tribes have a little bit of I don't want to call it advantage, but a unique situation where there is allocated tribal funds specifically for tribes. And so we are using quite a bit of those funds. We've been awarded several grants from the Biden administration that we're navigating through right now. And I'll give you an example of a really successful project. We just finished. I say just finished. It's about a year now. A large casino resort in Choctaw, Oklahoma. It's north of Broken Bow. It's a very beautiful place. It's almost becoming Little Branson. Really hills, lots of trees. It's beautiful. It's pretty raw. On the front end of that, as a price to that beautiful setting, there was zero infrastructure. There was very little power. The co-op there that serves that area, they were having a hard time meeting the demand of all the growth, cabins, businesses. And so here we are wanting to put in a huge resort with a load upwards of 5 megawatts. Well, we were able to work with Western Farmers Electric Co-op, and they're the transmission and generation co-op for that area, or for Oklahoma, really. And there happened to be a transmission line that crossed the northern edge of this property that we were getting ready to develop. And so we were able to come to the table and work with them and agree that this is going to help them with this area growth, but also going to help us. And we were able to build our own substation. This substation, it's got 2 feeders that are dedicated to our facilities, and then the co-op was able to use the other 2 feeders out of that substation to meet some of that demand. And so I would say that partnerships are paramount in everything that we do. And that's just one example of several projects that we've done.
Oh, that's a great example. And do you find, other than you mentioned your relationship with the feds, how about state and private partners?
So definitely private partners. Part of us starting this energy management, it was really just me in the beginning. We since hired an energy auditor. We realized real quick that we need a lot of help. We were able to really get leadership on board with using some tribal dollars to partner with a third-party consultant that performed a very large tribal-wide feasibility study for us. And it took a little over a year. We just wrapped it up, actually. So what the goal of that was to help us really identify kind of what we're focused on. Energy efficiency opportunities, conservation opportunities, and then kind of help us create a roadmap to start looking at those more sustainable, renewable type technologies. And so they did a wonderful job, and it was a huge success in that we really went from where do we want to go to here's how we do it. We were able to budget for enough funding to retrofit over 20 facilities with LEDs and start some retro commissioning at some of our larger plants, our casino, headquarters. And so really excited about that and the amount of energy that can save. So yeah, we do have really good dealings with federal and private. Now state, on the other hand, we haven't really worked with them, to my knowledge, on energy security. Now, we're certainly open to it. That's another one challenge that I think is unique to tribes, is that maintaining sovereignty while also allowing these partnerships to really, mature and collaborate. And it's always a challenge.
Let me ask you about cybersecurity. This, of course, is an issue in all kinds of industries and certainly in utilities. To what degree do you guys interact with your utility and talk with them about concerns about cybersecurity?
Well, sure. I think it's definitely a topic that we've started really trying to focus on and work with them. And like I stated earlier, we are dependent upon our utility providers, and so they need to know from us our concerns of what they're doing as far as their cybersecurity measures. And I can't really provide a good answer yet as to what they're doing. I want to say that they are familiar with the topic, and they have told us that, yes, we are starting to really focus on this. And so the conversation's definitely started. Now, internally, the Choctaw Nation, we own and operate 2 of our own data centers. We've got a really robust IT department, and we actually house these data centers we use. So there are servers, that's our infrastructure. We run our fiber lines out of these data centers to our facilities. We have to go through mandatory annual cybersecurity training.
Well, I'll tell you, in talking with cybersecurity experts, basic training for employees not to open those emails and not to click on links is just a huge part of cybersecurity. Let me ask you, go back to the state for a second. You have a lot of state lawmakers and legislative staff, others interested in state policy. What should state officials know how to better deal with the Choctaw Nation in terms of energy resilience, energy security? What would you like them to know that maybe they don't know?
I think states and tribes, I think it's a two-way street. It takes, 2 to dance type deal. But I think, again, it's just know that, and they know this, we are such an economic driver, and we are fully integrated in the state of Oklahoma. And so I think if we come to that common ground that, and not to say that there's any negative ground there, but it does have its challenges, but just to come to that common thinking that what's good for Oklahoma is going to be good for Choctaw Nation. I don't know the exact percentage, but I would say that there's a pretty high percentage of tribal members who live in the state of Oklahoma. I mean, naturally, it goes without saying. And so these are Oklahoma citizens as well as, they live in Oklahoma, but they're also Choctaw Nation. What benefits us is going to benefit the state and vice versa.
As we wrap up here, Trent, let me ask you, you've had quite a bit of change there from what you described earlier in our interview. What do you see in the future for the Choctaw Nation and energy security generally there?
So I think that first year when we started our energy management department, it was a great success, and it caught a lot of attention and a lot of pats on the backs, and it really has, in my opinion, showed our leadership that, hey, this is important. And I think it's just continuing to gain education on the topics of the day and the challenges. One thing I can say about the Choctaw Nation is the chief and the council and the assistant chief kind of pride themselves, the nation prides itself on having not just a 1-year vision, but a 100-year vision. And so I think energy security, energy management, I think we're starting to see that cultural shift and say, hey, we need to focus on this. And we've already been challenged from leadership in that, what does it look like to be a true tribal utility authority? What does energy sovereignty look like to where we're not so dependent upon, our utility providers? I think we'll always be grid tied just for redundancy and resiliency. We're starting to get a lot of support in our efforts and continuing these conversations with our utility companies, with our Department of Energy, and then I would love to start working with our state on some of this type of stuff. So I think that's just going to continue.
Well, Trent, thank you so much for taking the time. I think you've explained a lot of things that I think a lot of legislators, others in state government, might not grasp the nuance of for tribal nations. So thank you for that. I think that clarifies a lot of things. And you have a good day and take care.
All right, Ed. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I've been talking with Daniel Cardenas of the National Tribal Energy Association and Trent Marlett of the Choctaw Nation about the challenges to energy security for tribes. Thanks for listening. You can find NCSL podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast, Our American States, dives into some of the most challenging public policy issues facing legislators. Our occasional series, Across the Aisle, features stories of bipartisanship. Also check out our special series, Building Democracy, on the history of legislatures.